everybody who wants a soft fork or does not want a soft fork obviously has incentives behind it, right? Because for someone, Bitcoin is freedom money. For someone, Bitcoin is number go up. For someone, Bitcoin is they don't want to use the fiat system and they just want to like transact only in Bitcoin, live on Bitcoin standard. For someone, they're an investor, they follow government rules, they only buy ETFs. It's just different things for different sets of people.
This podcast episode is an event recording. If you're listening to the audio version, you might be missing some context from the speaker's visuals. You can find the video version at atlbitlab.com. That's atlbitlab.com. There might also be audience questions or other background chatter that's not audible. Look, event recordings are never perfect, but we're sharing it here because we think you're going to find something valuable in it. Let's talk a little bit about our sponsors first, and then we'll get on to the show. This episode is sponsored by ATL BitLab. ATL BitLab is Atlanta's Freedom Tech hackerspace. We have co-working desks, conference rooms, event space, maker tools, and tons of coffee. There is a very active community here in the lab. Every Wednesday night is Bitcoin night here in Atlanta. We also have meetups for cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, decentralized identity, product design, and more. We offer day passes and nomad passes for people who need to use the lab only occasionally, as well as memberships for people who plan to use the lab more regularly, such as myself. One of the best things about having a BitLab membership isn't the amenities, it's the people. Surrounding yourself with a community helps you learn faster and helps you build better. Your creativity becomes amplified when you work in this space. That's what I think, at least. If you're interested in becoming a member or supporting the space, please visit us at atlbitlab.com. That's atlbitlab.com. All right, on to our show.
Hey everyone, I'm Nitesh. I'm a software engineer. I work on Bitcoin stuff every day. I work here at the lab. So today we're going to talk about this long article that was written by a bunch of smart people. Some names you might be familiar with, some probably not. But essentially, the reason why this article was written was over the past, guess, probably more than 2-3 years now. There's a lot of um, controversy about upgrades in Bitcoin. So if you're familiar with Bitcoin and you run the Bitcoin software, it is like it's not an open secret that Bitcoin is really hard to change. Like if you want to add a new feature or pull a new feature out of Bitcoin, it takes a long time. And because Bitcoin is a decentralized network, there's a bunch of people who have voice on and opinions on what happens inside of Bitcoin. So these people could be, influencers, they could be large businessmen, investors, people who own exchanges, us here sitting in this room, could be anyone, right? So the idea behind this article or paper is that how do all these sets of people come together in order to come to consensus so that we can push Bitcoin forward in terms of making change to Bitcoin. But I'm not really gonna go through this article. I have made slides because obviously nobody's gonna read all that. So analyzing Bitcoin consensus, the risks of protocol upgrades. So, like I said, there's a bunch of people who came together, wrote this article because they believe that there is a lot of controversy about how you make changes to Bitcoin, you propose, and then people will hate you. Sometimes you even get death threats because you proposed a certain change and try to push for that change. And it's happened to quite some devs who basically stopped working on Bitcoin because they proposed to change, they pushed it too hard, the community did not understand or hated it or whatever, or probably it's bad, and people get mad. So, all right. What are we going to talk about today? So some basic overview. We're going to talk about what consensus is. We're going to talk about what soft forks and hard forks is, and then we're going to talk about how we can activate a fork in Bitcoin, basically activate a change in Bitcoin. And then we're going to talk about state of mind, which basically means what your state of mind is in terms of like where you stand for supporting versus not supporting a new change. And then we're going to talk about stakeholders, who are basically categories of people who are in different sectors of the Bitcoin industry. Like I said, they could be businessmen or people in this room or media influencers, podcasters, anyone, or devs, right? Okay, so what is consensus and what is consensus rules in Bitcoin? So at the bare minimum, like most of us know that, there are only 21 million Bitcoin. That is a consensus rule, right? Everybody agrees that, there are only 21 million Bitcoin and they'll ever exist. And, a block's mined approximately every 10 minutes and the size of the block is 4 megabytes and things like that. But where is all this stuff written? So this link, if you go, this pile of garbage, which is called C++, which nobody likes. Yeah, I can see. All right. So this is where the consensus rules of Bitcoin are written in. Now, it's not written in English. It's written in C++. And the reason Bitcoin does not have a spec, when I asked a few core devs, why is all this not written in English and only written in C++? They told me English can be misinterpreted, but code cannot be. So that's why it's written in C++ and not in English. At least that's the answer they gave me. Anyway, so for example, where is this? All right, so max block size, for example, if you know the maximum block size on Bitcoin is 4 megabytes, that means you can only cram 4 megabytes worth of transactions in a block. And then the Coinbase maturity. So every time you mine a block, new Bitcoin will created, and the Coinbase transaction which generates new Bitcoin cannot be spent for up to 100 blocks. Now that is a consensus rule. So these kind of consensus rules are written inside of, maybe on this one, or this one. Oh, there you go. Yeah, this says one Bitcoin is 100 million Satoshis. That's a consensus. So the maximum number of Satoshis that can ever exist. So 21 million Bitcoin into 100 million Satoshis, right? So all this stuff is written in C++ in this GitHub repo called Bitcoin, right? This is what, when somebody says you're running Bitcoin software, this is essentially what you're running in your computer at home, in a Raspberry Pi or a MacBook or whatever, right? So essentially, these are a set of rules that everybody has agreed saying this will be Bitcoin. That is essentially what consensus rules are and what consensus means. All right. So some of the most, popular consensus rules is, for example, a block validation. It includes how the block should be, what the size of the block is, the proof of work that goes into the block, and for example, transaction validation. How a transaction should be structured, what inputs are, what outputs are, and things like that, and including chain selection. When we'll get to the technical details of all of this. All right. First, okay, before we go into the actual topic of soft forks versus hard forks, we first have to understand, in the world of software, what a breaking change is and what a backwards compatible change is, right? What a breaking change basically means is, if you make a change, that means you make a change and push new code. That means people who upgrade to your new code have to go fix their old code to start supporting your new piece of code that you pushed. What backwards compatible means, you push a new feature, but people can just upgrade and not worry about it. Their existing software just runs fine. They don't have to worry about anything. All right? I can give you like a really, really basic example, right? So this is really, really simple piece of code. It says add numbers, right? Let's say the entire world does not know how to add two numbers. Everybody uses my code, right? Everybody uses Nitesh's code to add two numbers, right? Simple. It says there's a function. It takes in a number A. It takes in number B. returns a number. If either A or B is undefined, I'll say fuck, something's wrong. If it's not, then I'll return A plus B and I'll print it out, right? That's all it is. Now, if I run this, I'll say sum of numbers is 9, right? Great. But one morning, I wake up and say, hey, I don't want to support 2 numbers anymore. I want to start supporting adding 3 numbers, right? So what do? I go C number and all right. Now my code only supports adding 3 numbers. So everybody who was using my code in the past now has to go fix their code of adding numbers, right? This is a breaking change. Now, if I run this, it'll say, fuck, something went wrong, right? Now, this, like I said, is a breaking change. But how do I make this backwards compatible? I go and say C equals 0. All right, problem solved. And now I run it. Now the code works again, right? But this is backwards compatible. So I'm still supporting adding 3 numbers. I could like say 5 plus 4, comma 3, and then he'll say 9. But if I remove 3, it'll still work, right? So this essentially is what is backwards compatible versus what is a breaking change. This is like a very stupid, simple example, but you get the idea, right? The same thing applies in Bitcoin, right? When somebody says what a soft fork versus a hard fork is, a soft fork is when you push new code to Bitcoin and then somebody upgrades or the part of the network upgrades. That means you don't have to worry about anything. Everything that was running previously will just run fine as long as there are no bugs. What a hard fork is, you push a new software update, and then a part of the network upgrades, it'll behave differently for them, and the other half of the network that didn't upgrade will behave differently for them because the code is different and it's not backwards compatible, right? That's what this table basically says, right? Soft forks, they're backwards compatible. It's optional to upgrade. You don't upgrade, it's fine. Hard fork and upgrade is required in Bitcoin terms because if the whole network does not upgrade, we'll have something called a chain split, where half the network will say this is Bitcoin, and the other half will say, I don't know, Ethereum is Bitcoin, or Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin, or some other fork of Bitcoin is Bitcoin, which it isn't, right? Hey, okay. Soft forks, it tightens existing rules or adds new rules. Hard forks, it changes or relaxes existing rules. What, like relaxing a rule. Instead of 21 million, we had magically have 42 million Bitcoin, right? That's relaxing. Tighten. Instead of a 4 megabyte block size, we have a 2 megabyte block size, right? This is a graph historically on how long it takes by version of Bitcoin code, the C++ code that I showed you, takes to upgrade from one version to the other in terms of weeks, right? Initially, when Bitcoin first started, like way back when version 0.10, it only used to take less than 50 weeks to upgrade. But in general, if you see, it's trending upwards, the time it takes for people to upgrade their nodes. That means back then, usually only software engineers used to run nodes, like mostly people who are technical. Now, a lot of people run nodes. Now, a lot of people just plug in their nodes and forget it. Sometimes it's running for 2 years straight and they probably never looked at it. So the time it takes for someone to upgrade their nodes is getting longer and longer. So it's really risky to make breaking changes because people in general don't upgrade their software very frequently. So the last time Bitcoin had a breaking change as a hard fork was in 2011 or 2010. It was really a long time ago. Since then, we have not broken anything in terms of consensus. All right, we're talking about soft forks. How do we activate a soft fork, right? There's primarily 3 ways to do it. The first one is called flag day. It's like the oldest way to activate a soft fork. It's super simple. You make a flag saying, on this block height, a soft fork gets activated. It gets activated or does not get activated. That's it. It's like super simple. So basically all nodes, start upgrading, miners, start signaling, there's not really a signaling mechanism. So on that certain day, um, basically all nodes just transition from the old version to the new version. That's basically it. The problem with Flag Day is um, there is no flexibility in terms of upgrading. So, for example, if something goes wrong, you cannot like roll back. Like, for example, if slowly the network starts adopting and then somebody notices an issue, you can stop and then just go back and say, we're not doing this. But the problem with Flag Day upgrades, for example, is on that day, everybody upgrades and then you're screwed if something goes wrong, right?
Just so the principle is you download the upgrade ahead of time, but there's a certain date where
it goes live. That's it. You set a block height and it just goes live. Enough people, if enough nodes upgrade and enough blocks are following the new version, it's just live on the new version, right? Next, BEP34. This is a slightly, I wouldn't say complex, but it's an improved mechanism over Flag Day. The way this is done is inside a Bitcoin block. Let me open mempool.space. All right. Does this show block? Does this show a block header? Sorry, mind block. Does it show details of a block? Does it show like the version number? All right. This is the version number of the block, right? It shows hex, but imagine it's 1, 2, 3, whatever. Doesn't matter. So what BEP34 does is all miners who start running the new piece of software will bump this version number. Let's say it was version 1, they'll bump it to version 2, saying we are supporting this new software proposal. I don't know. It could be a hard fork, for example, or a soft fork. But essentially, they will just bump the version number from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, whatever, and say, after that, okay, so once they bump the version number, you track up to 1,000 blocks, and at least 75% of the nodes should at least 75% of the last 1,000 blocks should be signaling this new version number. If that does not happen, then the activation fails and you're back to where you were. If it does happen, then you wait another 1,000 blocks, and then at least 95% of the 1,000 blocks, which means 950 blocks, should signal the new version, and then it is successfully activated. So the first 75%, you can bump the version, and then it's still like old blocks and new blocks are accepted by the network. The next 1,000 blocks, the 950 blocks, or whenever the first 950 reaches, after that, the old version is no longer supported by the network. The blocks get rejected, right? So this is how BEP34 works. It works pretty well. The only downside to BEP34 is you cannot signal multiple soft forks if you want. Like, for example, you're trying to activate 3 different soft forks at the same time, and then but most of the miners only want to activate like one of them. They don't like the other 2, right? You can either signal all of them or like none of them. Like, you can't like specifically point saying I'm signaling for this one. So when you bump the version number, it means you are basically saying I'm signaling for whatever piece of code that you're running at that point of time. It works pretty well, but that was, at least from my understanding, that was the only downside. The upgraded version to that is BIP9. What BIP9 does is, instead of like bumping the whole number, they bump like bits of the number, like partial parts of the number, right? So you bump, let's say this becomes 0, 1, and that means it signals one soft fork. And this 0, 2 signals something else, 0, 3 signals something else. They bump like version bits of it. And then there's no 75% in this. This is simply the 95% rule, where over a period of 2016 blocks, if 95% of the hash rate is signaling towards something, that means that thing gets activated. The most recent one that we did like this was Taproot, right? This is just the differences it's explaining. This is like BIP34, like you just bump version 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? These were like the different soft forks that we activated with BIP34. And then this is BIP9, and then it's A, B, like like I said, you bump the version bits and not the whole version. All right. Any questions so far? I know this is getting technical.
So it's basically a voting system. Sounds back.
It is a voting. Okay, so the problem with BIP34 and BIP9 is regular humans don't really have a vote in it. The miners basically decide what happens because they're the ones who are signaling and then producing the blocks and then publishing. And because all this is backwards compatible, all the nodes on the network will either start accepting the block saying, oh, this is a new block, or the nodes will just not understand the new version and say, oh, this is cool, and let's say, okay. If it was breaking, if it's a hard fork, the nodes will not understand it because it's backwards compatible. All nodes will say, okay, cool, right? So the problem with BIP, these two BIPs is the miners almost have full control for a software to get activated. Like tomorrow morning, miners could like decide and activate a software on Bitcoin if they wanted to. They generally don't do it because they'll get a lot of shit for it, but they could if they want. And that is why. I'm sorry.
What was the last hard fork?
The last hard fork?
Yeah.
I think we activated OpNop in 2010.
And that required everyone to shift.
Yeah, but back then there was like 10 people running the node. So because miners have so much power, I think probably Luke Dash Jr. came up with BIP8. BIP8 is for the community as a together to activate a software or reject a software. What BIP8 does is, along with your node software, you run another piece of software on the side that talks to your node that either accepts or rejects blocks, right? So if you want to activate a new software and then and you just want to do it as a network, the miners, are still not signaling, but then they still produce the block template. And then they obviously mine the block and then send it out, right? But the more nodes start rejecting the block, it's bad for the miners because the network will split. So they will also start upgrading and then start showing support. That's basically the concept of BIP8, where again, it's basically you set a height and then at this height you say it basically activates and then a bunch of people upgrade. But the only difference is the process of upgrade starts with users instead of miners, right? Because they start upgrading their nodes and start rejecting blocks by miners. It also works the opposite way, which is it's called UASF and URSF. UASF is user activated software, and URSF is user resisted software. URSF is if the miners try to start activating a software, all bunch of users can run this side application that looks for that block, that version bit, or whatever the miners put in for signaling, and you can start rejecting blocks. And that's bad for the network as well, right? You don't want blocks to get rejected because when you broadcast a transaction or when a new block gets mined, you want all the nodes to like have the new block because that's how you sync to the blockchain. That's just how it works. So
that wouldn't necessarily fork the chain because everyone else knows that all the nodes are
yes,
rejecting.
right. But I suppose if there's like 50 people like half of the network rejecting blocks, maybe it'll create a chain split. I'm not very sure. Would it? That's fair. Yeah, but I guess the block propagation will stop. A lot of nodes might not, start listening for blocks and stuff like that. Okay, now the technical stuff is done. Now this is all the non-technical stuff. This is related to the human beings, right? All the stuff that we spoke before is about changing Bitcoin. But as human beings, where do we stand in terms of changing, right? Is the paper categorizes into 6 state of minds. You're passionate for the change, you're supportive of it, you're apathetic or undecided, you're unaware of what is going on, you're not supportive, but you don't really care either, you're just not supportive. And 6 is you don't like it and you actually spend resources and power to fight against it, right? These people usually, according to the authors of this paper, fall in these 6 categories. And the 2 that are highlighted in red are where most people are. They are either undecided or they have no clue, right, about what the change is. And all the people who are in Bitcoin are categorized into these 6 sections of people. Economic nodes, which are basically large exchanges, Coinbase, Binance, all these things. Investors, your Michael Saylors. Media influencers, your podcasters. Miners are your miners, mining pools. Protocol devs who actually work on the Bitcoin core software. Users and application devs is us in this room, right? Simple. First, economic nodes. So before we get into this, these 6 set of people, everybody who wants a soft fork or does not want a soft fork obviously has incentives behind it, right? Because for someone, Bitcoin is freedom money. For someone, Bitcoin is number go up. For someone, Bitcoin is they don't want to use the fiat system and they just want to like transact only in Bitcoin, live on Bitcoin standard. For someone, they're an investor, they follow government rules, they only buy ETFs. It's just different things for different sets of people, right? So for these people, you don't know who they are, Brian Armstrong and CZ Binance. For them, they have obviously have power. They can define what a fork is in the sense that because most of the Bitcoin activity happens on these exchanges, what the ticker symbol they decide could be what Bitcoin could be, right? And it's just because most of the volume happens on exchanges. Like 90% don't like 90% of people don't trade peer to peer, or they don't go to an OTC desk. They go to one of these large exchanges to buy and sell Bitcoin. They also run these massive nodes. For example, if they don't like a soft fork, they start rejecting those blocks, and that could be a problem. For example, if they don't like a fork and then a fork happens, they have all the users' funds and they don't like that fork, they can start dumping all those coins on the market. And they don't even have to tell you. And their incentives are they want more trading to happen on their platforms. And they have to comply with regulation and stuff like that. Next, investors. Sure. Yeah, I mean, if you don't want a fork to succeed, they could say, oh, this fork is Bitcoin and this fork is not Bitcoin. So our coins are this fork and not that fork, or something like that. They could exert enough power in terms of what their nodes can do. But I think the most important part of this is that they can set that they can sell the forks that they don't like. They can dump. So next, investors. Again, if you don't know, this guy is Michael Saylor. He talks a lot on TV. This guy is Larry Fink. He's the CEO of BlackRock, who steals all our lands. Right? Our land, like farmlands and land. They just buy a lot of it. Yeah, they buy a lot of real estate. Well, just buying a lot of them. Anyway, what powers do they have? They have influence on price. If Michael Saylor buys a lot of Bitcoin, everybody gets excited and say, yay, and then everybody buys Bitcoin and the price goes up. Same thing happened when BlackRock said we are starting an ETF. Bunch of capital poured in, Bitcoin price went up.
Make the distinction between, let's say, BlackRock or what you call economic node, like Coinbase. If BlackRock's also offering services, they could also have forks that they could sell. I mean,
they could, yeah.
How do you have making this distinction between influencer investors with economic?
I think the way so for BlackRock, they are not a custodian. Their coins are sitting on Coinbase. Coinbase is custodian their funds. So they're like different sectors of people. They're relying on Coinbase. So they're not the ones who are making decisions. Their nodes are not they don't even want to know, probably. Their nodes are not making any calls on what this fork is or that fork is. They could influence Coinbase to do it.
So this is the value of like owning your own coins, is that it gives them less influence. Right.
Sure. Yeah. I guess at least the investor side, they have more influence on the price of Bitcoin versus what actually happens with forks, and at least my understanding of it. So anyway, again, the powers, these guys, obviously they can influence the price because they have a lot of money. So they can, like, for example, they can say, oh, this soft fork is good because like 10 years from now, the futures market say this soft fork could like make the Bitcoin price go higher. We can pump the price higher because this fork or something gives some feature that helps the price go up, or something like that. They could also fund core devs, the Bitcoin protocol devs, to like, say, let's build this or let's build that, because they have the money to do it. And why do they do it? The biggest thing is number go up. For example, MicroStrategy is a publicly traded company. They have a lot of Bitcoin. If the price of Bitcoin goes up, their stock price goes up. Their shareholders are happy. Their CEO is happy. So their incentives is number go up. They would ideally like to stick to the concept of store of value of Bitcoin because it helps the price go up. And then obviously they're very compliant with the government. So this little chart basically shows how somebody can react to a fork, in the sense that, like, for example, somebody who self custodies their Bitcoin. For example, if I like don't like a fork and I want to sell my coins or whatever, I can act very quickly, right? I can immediately move my coins and then do whatever I want with it. But then as you go down the list, it gets harder and harder for somebody else to move their coins, because, for example, a publicly traded company needs approvals from board of directors, and their meeting only happens at 9 a.m. on a Monday, right? They have to wait. They can't like just magically move coins. And then the same thing with large ETFs. ETFs only trade Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 9:30 to 5 p.m. or whatever, right? So it gets harder and harder for somebody's ability to act when a soft fork happens or is going to happen or something. Media influencers. All right. This guy, his name is Adam Back. He's the CEO of Blockstream. Peter McCormack, big podcaster. Preston Fish, big podcaster. Not saying they're bad or good, but just put some photos. Again, the power that media influencers have is, if you remember that slide where the state of mind, where there's two sectors of people who are either undecided or just unaware, right? These sets of people have the ability to change the mind of especially those segments, right? Because that is where you consume your Bitcoin content from. You watch the news, you listen to podcasts, and then based on what they say, or what, if Adam Back likes a proposal and then you really like the guy, you just tend to like the proposal. That's just how we work, right? So then their powers could be, they can change your narrative, they can distort like a support, like, for example, because he has so much pull, he can say, oh, we don't like this software, but Blockstream built this better version of the same thing, so we should probably support this thing, right? He could totally do that. And then they can even censor positions of other stakeholders, like, for example, they don't like a software, they hypothetically, let's say Twitter does not like a software, they could censor information about that software, for example. But on the flip side, they can be great educators. incentives. Obviously, they generate more engagement, they get more following, they make more money. They also ideally want to maintain more credibility in the community. All these people, especially these two, they'll have sponsors for their podcasts and all that stuff, right? So they try and act in the best interest of the people who are paying them money. Miners. These are the people who are mining these blocks, who have massive data centers of machines that spend a bunch of energy to mine Bitcoin blocks, right? That's how Bitcoin is secure. These people have their own incentives, right? They want to make as much money as possible from this block reward. Like I told before, whenever a new block gets mined, this goes to the miners, right? This is the new Bitcoin that's created, along with transaction fee that goes to the miners. They want to get as much of this as possible. And they obviously want the network to be as stable as possible, because if something goes wrong, they're screwed. Protocol devs. These guys are the ones who write these awesome C++ code, right? His name is Luke, and she's Gloria. They maintain the Bitcoin core software. They can propose and implement new changes. This one's interesting to me because what we believe as Bitcoin is mostly this one repo that you see here. Like 99% of Bitcoin that software is running out there is just this, right? So people who work on this have a very high influence on what happens in the network, right? At least they have a lot of say. I mean, people are willing to listen to people who are like working on this. So because there is only one client, they also have the power to veto, right? Saying, oh, we don't like this fork, so we're not even going to bother working on it. And because there's no other client, if we don't work on it, you're screwed, because nobody else is going to work on it. Nobody's else, even if you work on it, nobody's going to run your software. So they kind of have this veto power, right? Their incentives are, they want to improve Bitcoin. They obviously want to maintain their reputation, but they could also be incentivized by sponsorships. Now, a lot of some of these people have jobs, but some of them, they're just sponsored by various companies. It could be ETFs, large, high net worth people. So they could also be influenced by the people who are paying them. So,
Maybe like a grant. Oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead, and then we'll go.
First, my question is just like, is there some kind of gateway to becoming one of these devs? Like,
You basically have to contribute long enough to Bitcoin Core, and then there's like a process where they, eventually bump you up to being a core maintainer, where you actually have access to push into the code directly.
how many replicable devs?
Right now, maybe they're like 4 or 5. I don't know how many are like actively working. Tech- Right. Yeah.
Jonas was talking about the task company. He estimated like 149.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if he meant like across teams other than Bitcoin Core or just Bitcoin Core.
Okay.
Remember, he was looking for number 150 in his presentation, but there's a much smaller number of core maintainers, which are the people with the kind of pick the merge button and all that. There's far more protocols.
Yeah. You said 7?
Yeah, there's 7
7 maintainers? Okay, cool. All right. Oh, Jordan, sorry.
How that kind of. Yeah, I'm just curious as how you say sponsorships, is that kind of referring to like spiral grantees and OpenSats grantees?
I think they're not that much of a problem. I can give you an example. For example, Luke worked on an implementation of Bitcoin's fork and added Bit300 for who's the Bit300 guy? Paul Storch, right? So he paid Luke to work on implementing drive chains. And to be fair, he was very transparent about it, but he got paid, right? Got paid to do it. So you can like pay someone to like push a soft fork or build one, and then actively push towards, push your influence on the community, saying, hey, I'm a code maintainer, this software is awesome. Because they have so much pull, more people tend to listen to them and things like that.
Because I think that's kind of, a lot of people are confused as to why and how, like, these people don't work for companies per se,
Some do, some don't.
but even when they do, if they're largely granted, then they're getting financial reimbursement for the work that they're doing on the project. And there's these organizations that are trying to just incentivize workers on the project.
Right.
Like OpenSense is an example, right?
Okay, so for grants, like I think grants, I could be wrong, but in my opinion, grants, because they're just given so that these people are actively maintaining Bitcoin Core and not per se of like pushing a soft fork. So it's just like, you're doing community work, so get paid for it. But I think when it comes to pushing soft forks, the money we're talking about is much larger and stuff like that. Alex?
Yeah, one thing to add is
So who they are is public knowledge, but they could be anonymous. Like you can see the contributors on Bitcoin, and then you can literally. Some people have pictures. You know who they are. They come to conferences. Some people are anonymous. They don't show their faces really. So it's public who they are, but they not necessarily public where they live. And next one is us. So users and application devs, like all of us in this room, right? What powers do we have? We yell on Twitter and everywhere else, right? And then what else can we do? We threaten to exit and mass sell Bitcoin. To your point, like maybe a lot of people have more Bitcoin in self custody versus like the custodians have. And then if I don't know, all of us like get together and say, hey, we don't like this fork, we'll all sell, we'll mass exit. Maybe the price will go down to zero, and I don't know, Bitcoin will die. So I don't know, but this is the power that we have, right? Obviously, for some reason, the paper like combines like users and application devs together, but that's fine. But the application devs could have slightly more influence in the sense that they're working on some application, like a wallet or something that improves, makes faster Bitcoin transactions or whatever. And a certain software can help them. And then, they're also really influential in the community, so they can, push a certain software and things like that. But in general, this is what users and application devs can do. All right. And the next part is when Stephen's going to talk about it. How do all these people like reach consensus to activate a software? So you got to wait for that for March 5th. That's it.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about anything that we discussed, you can look for links in the show notes. That should be in your podcast player, or you can go to atlbitlab.com/podcast. On a final note, if you found this information useful and you want to help support us, you can always send us a tip in Bitcoin. Your support really helps it so that we can keep bringing you content like this. All right, catch you later.